Good morning, I'm harleysch from the LaRouche organization with your daily video update for January 4th, 2023. Today the topic is the dying gasp of the Anglo-American Empire. What we're seeing is an escalation of confrontation, of conflict, of wars across the globe. And the reason is the Western establishment is facing an endgame. The endgame is defined by a number of failures in recent policy of the empire. And I want to make it clear that when I'm talking about the Anglo-American Empire, the City of London and the British are at the center of shaping the policy, which has been increasingly adopted as U.S. strategic policy, as you'll see in the course of this discussion, during the course of the post-World War II period. But the immediate situation is defined by the failure to recognize the collapse of the Ukraine proxy war as a strategy to weaken Russia. In reality, Russia has been strengthened, and it's America's allies who have been weakened by the effects of sanctions, the energy policy, and so on. Ukraine itself has been depleted of people and of the potential to have a successful economy. And the Western nations, the stockpile of weapons have been depleted as well. And it's clear that the economic and industrial establishment is not capable of keeping up with what's needed to conduct a war of the sort that NATO has chosen. Now, we also see the same thing with the Israeli war in Gaza, the policy of ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. This has isolated the U.S., the United Kingdom, and Israel completely, as seen in several votes at the United Nations General Assembly and the UN Security Council. There's now a motion brought by South Africa to the International Court of Justice to charge Israel with genocide under the 1948 Genocide Convention. We've seen in the last days this escalation, the assassination of an Hamas leader in Beirut, the assassination of a Revolutionary Guard commander of Iran in Syria, and the explosion during the commemoration of the 4th anniversary of the assassination of Soleimani, the former leader of Iran's Revolutionary Guard, the Quds movement. Now, we're also seeing an economic crisis building in the West, and in particular in the United States. I'll just call your attention to one aspect of this. The Office of Financial Research put out a statement yesterday saying the U.S. banking system is, quote, fragile and uncertain. So when you look at this picture, it's clear that the question that should be raised is, why were these conflicts pushed to the point of war? What's driving the policy of the establishment? Well, and it's clear that it's the end of the empire. The Anglo-American, City of London, Wall Street, corporate cartel empire is on the verge of collapse. Now, this empire emerged after World War II in opposition to the design of Franklin Roosevelt for a world of peaceful cooperation. Roosevelt's idea was carried forward to some extent during the Eisenhower administration and was being fully revived by President John F. Kennedy before his assassination, which was largely due to his attempt to revive that in opposition to the Anglo-American policy. And so the Cold War continued, especially after the assassination of Kennedy, and then the economic empire continued its policy after Nixon's decision in August 1971 to take the dollar off the gold reserve system and to establish a floating exchange rate system, which meant a move from physical economy to a casino speculative economy. Now, even with that, the peaceful end of the Soviet Empire in 1991 presented an opportunity for cooperation rather than conflict. What was the response from the West? The Wolfowitz Doctrine, named after neocon Paul Wolfowitz, who coordinated with Cheney, with Rumsfeld, and others, a policy of permanent warfare, colonial wars, 2 wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Ukraine, the continuation of this policy to the present, including the threats to go to war with China. And alongside that was the weaponization of the dollar. Now, this essentially grew up under something that Wolfowitz drafted, which was the Defense Planning Guidance of February 1992, when Wolfowitz was Undersecretary of State. And the doctrine is based on the idea that the U.S. is the sole remaining superpower, and it must do whatever is necessary to maintain that position. Let me just read the initial statement, which shows the absolute imperial intent of the Wolfowitz Doctrine. Quote, "Our first objective is to prevent the reemergence of a new rival, either on the territory of the former Soviet Union or elsewhere, that poses a threat on the order of that posed formerly by the Soviet Union. This is a dominant consideration underlying the new regional defense strategy and requires that we endeavor to prevent any hostile power from dominating a region whose resources would, under consolidated control, be sufficient to generate global power. In other words, there must be no rivals allowed, and U.S. military and NATO military must be deployed to make sure that that does not occur. This was reinforced with the Project for a New American Century in 1997, which was run by the neocons William Kristol and Mr. Victoria Nuland, Robert Kagan. The Bush Doctrine was another iteration of this, the so-called war on terrorism, which officially incorporated the idea of preemptive strike and no multilateralism. The slogan of this was, "You're either for us or against us." Now, the attempt to extend this in the financial realm was the drive by the World Economic Forum and a series of U.S. administrations to push the Great Reset, a combination of green policy and global central banking, which excluded the existence of any sovereign nation state, that all had to be subordinated to this financial military power. Now, this has been rejected, and here's where we see why we're facing all these wars and conflicts. The global South has rediscovered the position of anti-colonialism. We see it with the BRICS, which started out as Brazil, Russia, India, China, added South Africa, and now has added 5 more countries. It's now the BRICS 10. The emergence of the global South overall, including African leaders finding a voice and refusing to go along with the old colonial game. This is the move against the weaponization of the dollar with de-dollarization. But it's not just a negative thing, it's a move toward cooperation along the lines that was proposed by the original non-aligned movement in the mid-1950s. Cooperation for economic development, for corridors of development which will connect countries both on land and by sea, with the prime example of this being the Belt and Road Initiative. In the last days, there's been more progress on what the BRICS are doing. The New Development Bank of the BRICS just granted a $1 billion credit to Brazil for infrastructure. And also the Chinese and the Saudis, remember Saudi Arabia is one of the new members of the BRICS, just signed a $6.93 billion swap agreement in yuan, meaning the Chinese can pay for oil in yuan, the Saudis can then use the yuan for purchasing goods produced in China and so on. And along with this is a broader move toward trade in national currencies outside the dollar. This is the new development architecture, which was initially foreseen by Lyndon LaRouche after the Nixon move in 1971, when LaRouche said that the world will move either into a direction of fascism and war or toward new era of cooperation and development. And this was his response to Nixon's move with the development of the International Development Bank and a number of other programmatic options written up by Lyndon LaRouche. Now, the Saudi-China swap agreement was one of the things that provoked a comment on MSN.com. One analyst said, quote, Saudi Arabia's induction into the BRICS bloc is a game changer. The global financial landscape is undergoing a dramatic transformation with the BRICS alliance at the forefront. This has been something that Putin has said recently, that this transformation is unstoppable. The Chinese, when questioned about it, said, we are fully confident in the BRICS future. And that's the future of humanity. Either war and fascism, as LaRouche warned, under the so-called rules-based order, which is nothing but a global fascist order where the rules are those of the City of London and Wall Street to maintain their supremacy, or we can move toward mutually beneficial cooperation and development. Now, the Wolfowitz Doctrine is a classic case of British geopolitics updated. It can still be a destructive force. It could still provoke wars, including nuclear war. But the alternative for the Western nations would be to adopt a new paradigm. That is a new security architecture and development architecture, and recognize that the enemy of the people of the West is not terrorism, because terrorism is part of the British toolbox. We see this in terms of the role of the U.S. in supporting and defending the terrorist assault against the Assad government in Syria. And it's not Russia nor China. The enemy is a desperate financial oligarchy. So the solution is to join us to put that oligarchy out of business. Now, I'm going to be appending to the description section two things that will give you more depth in addressing this. One is the new draft legislation that we came up with, that we wrote, the LaRouche organization, Swords to Plowshares Act of 2024. Read it, circulate it, go to your congressional offices and demand that they adopt this instead of spending more money on death and destruction in Ukraine and Gaza, in the Taiwan Strait, and so on. And I'll also append my discussion with Helga Zepp-LaRouche from yesterday, where she developed these ideas much more thoroughly. And finally, since tomorrow is Friday rather, I'll take your questions. You can send them to me at harleysch@gmail.com.